see that red light.
Still waiting. There we go. Okay. Welcome. Let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I've asked Commissioner Hurst to provide us with a legislative prayer thought for tonight, so we'll go ahead and turn the time over to her.
So I've been thinking a lot about change lately. As many of you heard last night, my oldest is graduating from high school next week, and he got his mission call last week. And our family is definitely changing, and it'll be different. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about this afternoon, as I was thinking about some of the changes that I've realized from being a part of the Planning Commission. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for is just all of the various opinions, and maybe opinions isn't the right word, but you know, the different ideas that we have and what we believe makes a great community. And I think that those different ideas have really brought about in me a change, and that I have a broader perspective of all the many great ways that we can have this great community that we live in. And it reminded me of a quote by Albert Einstein. And he says, "The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking." So thank you to all of you for helping me change my thinking, and I appreciate that. And with that, I'll just give a word of prayer. Our dear kind Father in heaven, we're so grateful for the opportunity that we have to serve our community on this Planning Commission. We're grateful for the opportunity to be together tonight. Please bless us that we will be able to listen with our ears and to hear the things that people feel the need to express, that we'll hear those things that need to be conveyed by our staff who have spent many hours preparing these documents. And please bless us that we'll have thy guidance to know the right things to do to continue to make this community a great place to live. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. I feel much the same way, so I appreciate your thought. Okay, first item on our agenda is we're being asked to consider the proposed temporary use for a conditional use permit application for the Avalanche Snow Cone Shack. So let's go ahead and turn time over to staff.
All right, thank you, Commission. So this is Avalanche Snow Shack, formerly known as Rainbow Snow, until Miss April Anderton bought it from the previous owner. So she'll be in the exact same location with the exact same structure as the Rainbow Snow that you might know from previous years. So as with all temporary uses, we'll go over these development standards. And because there is some desire for changes within these development standards, that is why she's before you tonight asking for a conditional use permit. So as you can see in the staff report, there are about 10 things like insurance and inspection and access and parking. But the biggest concern for the applicant is the time limit for temporary retail sales. She's limited to 10 days, 4 times a year. So obviously she wants to sell throughout the summer and exceed that 40-day time limit, and therefore she needs that conditional use permit, which is allowed to be modified within these standards. So then we go through the conditional use process review to mitigate any impacts on the community. As you guys know about Pages Lane, is the site plan? Let's pull that up really quick. Pages Lane has plenty of extra parking around it. The site that she's on specifically, this building is currently underway in a tenant finish to be a nail salon and has about 15 parking stalls on that site that she'll be sharing with that tenant or that owner of that lot. But obviously there's plenty of vacant space around this area for circulation and parking and for customers to drop in. It certainly wouldn't cause too much traffic just with this little snow shack. And we don't think that there'll be other impacts on the community or the commercial stores in the area. So We obviously don't have too many concerns about it. This has been a temporary use there for years, but because of just kind of a lapse in business renewal, they had to come back for that CUP because it was grandfathered in. But then because they went over a year without getting one, now they have to come back and do this conditional use. So last time they were here was in 2016. And the Planning Commission at the time decided that the conditional use permit for this temporary use would expire a year from that date. And so that's why they're here again. But the definition of a conditional use permit is allowed to be indefinite. So, but it's up to the Planning Commission. So you guys not only set that modification of the time limit of the conditional use permit in this case, but also the expiration. So that is up to you guys if you want to extend that time limit in the CUP or the expiration of the CUP, or do it as an annual renewal like they did previously. The only problem with setting it like more than a year but not indefinite, like if you wanted to do a 5-year expiration or something like that, that it would be hard for staff to keep track of at that point. So our recommendation would just be to do like an annual expiration or an indefinite one, just because when it gets into those in between, it's hard for us to keep track of. So those are our recommendations for the expiration of that. So, but those are to be set by you in the conditions. You guys have any questions?
Can you just clarify, if we were to set it for a year and a half, for instance, and they used it and then they used it again, within that year and a half, would then it carry over for the next year?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's two kind of factors that play into that. One is the conditional use process that Cassie talked about. The other one's the licensing. So the licensing is an annual renewal. So if you used an 18-month issue, their license they pay for is the first year. Then a renewal will go out, and then it's paid for again for another year. But then if the expiration is midpoint of the year, we'd have to shift and prorate that change.
I was just thinking if there was an expiration that was a year and a half, would then the use of it bump that each year to a year and a half? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you're saying I mean, we understand from previous conversations that this kind of administrative approval may change, and we explained to April about the city may adjust that on their own, or whether she as a business operator would want to ask for a change because that year is an awkward place for this use if it extends beyond the normal temporary use period. And so we don't know how that's going to play out. I think Cassie's making a great point to you. It's one of those where tracking, business licensing, things get kind of intermingled, and it becomes difficult to keep things in place. You know, the simple answer is a year to year is an easy one to track, or subsequent years are easier to track because we can know through the license renewal process where we might be. What we've seen in the past is the commission has done a 3-year on I think the Home Depot when they have the outdoor storage originally. That was done like over a 3-year. You extended it 3 years. But again, it's back to that temporary use. Conditional use says this is an indefinite period of time unless the Planning Commission says otherwise. And the otherwise is coming into this case, the temporary nature of a business. And so what is that otherwise? Is it expected to be year to year? Is it something that can be extended? And we're trying to say to you, extension is a feasible idea, but you also have that these are supposed to be temporary. So, you know, something indefinite with a temporary use doesn't make it temporary. So that's the concern. And I think the purpose for this being temporary, especially in this location, is there's lots that's going to be changing in this location in the near future. So having an indefinite on this location may hinder what we're trying to do there. So
yeah, and I don't think that the indefinite is a good idea. That's why we're saying it's a temporary use, because it's not like a building, and if you did the indefinite, then they would be grandfathered with any kind of change. And
Right.
so it really needs to be a shorter defined period. Right now, the policy has been year to year, but for the Home Depot, we did finally go 3 years.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for staff?
Do they own the parcel of property that, I mean, do they own like a little stamp of ground there? Or is it by lease or what?
No, they just have an agreement with the property owner.
Let's go ahead and invite the applicant to step forward if you'd like to speak to us regarding this matter. Yeah, just right there. If you could just state your name for the record.
April Anderton. I've never done this before.
Is there anything more you want to add to what was told?
Not necessarily. They've pled my case pretty good. I'd love to at least stay this season. I know that there's going to be changes made, so I'm okay, on a year-to-year basis or whatever for now. If that needs be, then that needs be. So whatever is good for Centerville.
Great.
All right.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open to the public if anyone would like to step forward to speak to this matter. Seeing no one step forward, we'll close the public hearing. Any further discussion by the commission?
Yeah, I'm inclined to move forward with this and approve it on a yearly basis, especially considering this might be staff next year if the stars align. Or maybe a redevelopment will have happened. So I think a yearly makes a ton of sense and move forward with it.
Yeah. We have
I
precedent. Mm-hmm. We're proposing changes to it that'll streamline it next year, and Pages Lane
We don't know
could
what
change
it's gonna be.
radically.
Yep.
So I think that for all of those reasons, and the applicant has indicated that a year is fine for her as well. So for all of those reasons, I would be comfortable going with a year. Okay, Chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve a conditional use permit for Avalanche Snow, a temporary shaped ice stand located at 199 East Pages Lane, subject to conditions 1 through 8 in the staff report, with suggested reasons for actions A through D.
Becky, could I suggest a friendly amendment that we, that in condition 1, we state that it shall expire 1 year from approval?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Yes. And that condition 1 will be amended to say shall expire 1 year from approval.
1 year from approval, is that
Standard.
pretty standard, Corey?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
From the approval, which would be today.
Okay, from
Okay.
today.
Second.
Right. Seconded. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? Since I know that you like to start things out, Commissioner Johnson.
Aye, thank you.
Aye.
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 Okay, it's been approved. Thank you very much.
Chair Heyman, may I address the applicant?
Yes.
April, just so you know, we'll get with Donna tomorrow on the business license and get the package all wrapped up for you so that you can get underway.
All right, we'll move right along to the next item on our agenda. We're being asked to consider the proposed conceptual site plan for an addition to the existing Granadas office building located at 1312 West, 75 North, and we'll turn the time over first to staff.
Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. I'm just trying to zoom to the location.
What did we do before Google Maps?
So you can see on the screen here is the site, 1312 West. It's also known as 1318 West. This is a use currently approved in the city as a warehouse office space. It's a flex use facility in our industrial zone. If you look at your site plan, which I'm not showing on the screen, to the west of the building, there is a proposed addition for the site, and I'll let the applicant address some of their needs. But we've pointed out some issues associated with the submittal, and also the applicant has been contacted, and I believe that they will discuss some of those matters for you tonight. But in summary, for the presentation purposes, the addition would be on the west side. We reviewed it. We've had several discussions with the applicant, and and there's numbers being thrown around on the number of parking that needs to take place. There's some amendments or changes that they're anticipating, so we acknowledge that under our report, but we had to review it according to the submittal that came before us. And what we see in the submittal is this addition would be entirely west. It would take out some of the parking that's associated with the west side of the building. There's a relocation of dumpster, which will also take out a few stalls. And we try to outline from the plans the grid of the addition versus the number of stalls that is affected. And we know that they may look at resizing some of the stalls and the counts and would maybe clarify some of those numbers to you tonight. But all in all, there is some elimination of stalls going on. And they have provided to the east, if you recall, the existing Bountiful Glass was remodeled and purchased by the Bridge Community Church. The Bridge Community Church has an agreement with this neighbor, the applicant tonight, to use some of their stalls in the off-peak hour to satisfy the weekend and the worship services counts that a church facility is required. And they're also planning, the applicant tonight is planning to use that in reciprocal so that there is some off-site stalls when the church is not available or when the church is not used, so they can use some of the parking and therefore qualify to have an addition to the building. Although that's their request, we do raise some questions about that issue. I think our largest issue is that we don't know the future of the church either. So we have this reciprocal agreement, and doing off-site parking on off hours can tag and work. But if changes take place, there can be a concern. Think of this facility as flex space. There's a calculation of the amount of office, which is an aggressive 5 per 1,000 for every 1,000 square feet of office. Warehouse reduces that count to 1 stall per 1,000. And so when you think of flex space, what we've seen in the past, and you've seen it even recently in some discussions, as one entity inherits the building or takes the building in its current configuration, they have a tendency over time want to adjust it. And so you might add more office space and less warehouse, or the reverse might happen. And this is where you have tension on small properties with stall counts. If they want to increase the office space, do they have enough on-site parking to increase the office space? Are they relying on the off-site parking? Is that the right decision to rely on the off-site parking? In this case, our concern is that there are 2 extra stalls roughly at the count of the original approval, but they are significantly adding addition, which permanently subtracts that stall count away. And that reduces the availability for this flex space to add and subtract without having to go. It's forcing it to the off-site space. And that's a concern we raise. I know there was discussions with the applicant that some of the parking is being replaced by the warehouse because currently some of the storage vehicles, the contractor vehicles and other things that they currently use the parking stalls for will be replaced and be parked within the warehouse space. But we don't look at what their vehicle count is for their business operation. We're looking at that this is patron and employee parking for the facility. And so if this flex spaces go right, or if the office spaces increases, we need those stalls to accommodate it. And so the loss of those stalls is a bit of concern from staff's perspective. So we raise that cautionary tale. In the merits of what was submitted to us, even the use of the off-site parking, if you were to grant the off-site parking approval, from the analysis, we still fall short of the number of stalls in its entirety. So even adding the 12 stalls with a subtraction count of 13, the addition of 12, and then they want to add warehouse space and office space on top of that, we're underparked, even in a shared scenario. So our report had to recommend to you that this configuration is not acceptable even with a request for a modification. We acknowledge that in the report. I contacted the applicant a day before the report went out. They understood where we were positioning with that, indicated they're making some changes. They will probably likely discuss those changes with you tonight. So your concern tonight is you've got an analysis from us. You're going to hear from them how they propose maybe some solutions. I think your task at hand is those alterations sufficient tonight to move it forward to the next step? Are you comfortable with that if it seems feasible to move to the next step? Or is that something that you would rather table to a subsequent meeting and us to come back and come up with how that scenario should take place? Our only worry is simply from the fact of the conceptual is supposed to at least identify the issues, and it's supposed to be identifying the issues where you potentially solve the code problems. So we'd hate to move forward with a conceptual acceptance if we're still not clear whether we can achieve the final outcome compliance with the ordinance. And so hopefully that explains it to you, and I'll leave it to you for questions and the applicant to make their arguments.
Thank you, Corey. Just to make sure that I'm understanding the numbers, with the off-site shared parking agreement, there's still 10 stalls under, right?
Yeah, I think I don't remember the numbers now because I didn't read them before the meeting, but you have 13, the way if I remember right, 13 were being eliminated, 12 were being replaced with the shared parking or the modification, but it's not accounting for the new office space and the warehouse space. So we should be 3 to 4 stalls short, even if you approve the modification. Does that make sense?
I think so, although I'm looking at the staff report on the amendment request under the parking tabulations, and it indicates that there's a total required parking of 42 stalls required, but that even with the off-site shared parking agreement, it's coming to a total of 32. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding just how close we're coming to that.
Yeah, you're right. It's still the additional space adds too much. And I think they will address to you the clarity of how much office and how much we had to estimate from their plans.
Okay.
A rough estimate of what we think the office space is versus the warehouse. But here's the count. They are looking at providing 20 stalls on-site, off-site, the 12 with the adjacent user, the church facility, 32 count is provided, 42 would be required. So
they're based on our estimations, and I recognize that could change based on what the applicant tells us, but right now it looks like they're 10 stalls too short with the shared parking agreement.
Correct.
And without the shared parking agreement, they're 22 stalls short.
They would be significantly short.
Okay.
And that's our issue is the under parking demand, and then that further hampers the flex space capability into the future on the property. So let them make their case, because I did eliminate 2 stalls and I couldn't tell whether they're in there would be the southeast corner. I couldn't tell if that footprint was the eave footprint of the roof or the foundation footprint of the building. And so there may be 2 stalls there that could be made up with that scenario.
And we'll invite the applicant to address that issue. Any other questions for staff?
I have a question. So you used the phrase aggressive count 5 stalls per 1,000 with the office space, right?
I call it aggressive because we require a substantial, Centerville's ordinances are 1 stall per 1,000 more for office than almost every ordinance out there that I'm aware of.
That's what I was wondering. That's exactly what I was
wondering. Most city ordinances, the retail and office are 4 per 1,000. Centerville, in its history of Main Street and some parking problems, amended their ordinances and said for office it will be 5 stalls per 1,000. So when I say the word aggressive, I'm meaning that extra stall per 1,000 is an anomaly in most parking standards.
In most cities. And just hypothetically, if I know that's not the case, but I just want to know hypothetically, if we did 4, that would make it just basically 10 stalls less, right? Per thousand? Is it a
I
total
gotta
of
run those
5,000?
numbers. So the office total, so the amendment request would be a total of 6,540.
Or just 5 stalls,
Yeah,
roughly?
yeah. And we round to the nearest whole for parking.
Okay, any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter.
Things out to you. Some of the revised.
Sure, if you just want to hand it to the city attorney there. And then if you'll introduce yourself for the record.
My name's Dan Holbrook. I'm with Merrill Sheriff Construction, and we are proposing to build a warehouse office addition on the Renatus building. Granted, the site plan that we submitted was short parking. We knew that going in, but we hadn't finalized everything. Our revised site drawing that's going around right now will show that we have 31 parking spaces available on site without the 12 from the Bridge Church. How we accomplished that was we took out a little bit of the planter side on the east side. We brought the size of the stalls down from 9 foot 8 inches to 9 foot, and we picked up a couple more. Right now, can I approach the screen to show you what's going on?
Here's a pointer.
Yeah, we do have an official pointer.
Okay. So what we're proposing is adding one parking stall right here. We shortened these down to 9 foot instead of 9 foot 8. The new addition will come out here. Here's the dumpster right now. We're going to be relocating it here, but we can park in front of the dumpster because the dumpster empties in the evening or in the mornings early before the staff gets there. And with the new building up, we'll put our parking. Right now, these 3 trailers right here will be inside the building. That's one of the reasons why the owner is building the addition, is to enclose his trailers in. And we will enlarge the parking area over here to pick up some, and we'll still put parking in front of the roll-up doors since they're for the private use of the building. Also on the information I sent you, I actually did a little case study over there over the past 23 days, going at different hours of the day to get an actual count of the building, the cars that are parked there every day. Because this is not a retail facility, they really have no walk-in clientele. So in my case study on the parking, the 2 busiest days he had was days 10 and 11, which were May 10th and 11th, where he had an activity going on inside the building for those 2 days that they do every quarter is what his staff told me, but this was the first one for this year. And they didn't have one planned as of last week for this quarter, the next upcoming quarter. Have they scheduled any more for the year? No, not yet. This is Bob, he's the owner, Bob Snyder. So those 2 days were the biggest days, and as you can tell, they used 32 spots on the biggest days. The average, though, was a little over 10 parking spots per day because, like I said, there's no walk-in traffic for this facility. So with the parking from Bridge Community Church, that puts us, the 31 plus the 12 gives us 43. And you said we needed 40? 42, so we're 1 over. If you will allow us the same opportunities you granted Bridge Community Church to use Bob's parking on the off hours and on those couple days every year where we exceed our parking in the parking lot, we should be good. And you were pretty close on your different flex space parking. I called around a couple of the cities. North Salt Lake's 4 spaces per 1,000 for office and 2 spaces on the warehouse. Bountiful is 4 spaces, office, 1 space per 1,000 on the warehouse. Farmington is 2 spaces per 1,000 on the office and 1 space per 1,000 on the warehouse. And Kaysville is 2 spaces per 1,000 and 1.2 spaces per 1,000 for the warehouse. So you're in the middle there. You're pretty close to everything. So
Staff indicates that they estimated on their use tabulations that you'd be using about 6,500 square feet for office and 7,600 square feet for warehouse. Is that consistent with what you were estimating?
the new addition is, I gotta take my glasses off to see. If you look on C400, they give you the proposed addition, and then the new warehouse and existing building is 5,400 square feet for the office and 4,100 square feet for the warehouse building. And the new addition is 5,400 square feet for the office space, which is the second floor, and 4,200 square feet of for the warehouse area, which is the ground floor.
Help me do the math, Corey.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, I'm looking, I'm not sure because on the site plan that's before you, the existing building is 422670 for floor area, and the addition is showing 422670 for the floor area. And is there's second floor for the office?
well, if you look on the bottom right, the chart on the bottom right
Yeah.
of the site plan, it shows proposed addition, floor 1, and then floor 2, and then the total 4241.
Yeah, it's a little
For the
over
office.
6,000 square feet for the
Okay,
new
that's what I'm
addition.
trying to check, because I got
And then the
six-
warehouse 21, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not always optimal to review a site plan on the spot. My recommendation would be to allow staff time to analyze this, and, you know, review things like whether or not you can count a parking stall in front of a roll-up garage, and the width on some of these.
Talking with the civil engineer, that you can count that. So, because that's one of the questions I brought up to our civil engineer.
Right, that would be more like an ordinance question in my mind. I don't know if our ordinances, but I guess you do it in a house all the time.
Yeah.
The other comment I was going to make is that, in my opinion, I know we debated this before, but I think they need to comply with 1252-110, which talks about shared use parking. It authorizes the Planning Commission to require a shared parking study to be completed to justify the conclusion. And it also requires, in my opinion, the agreements that were signed before are not adequate. The shared parking agreement needs to be a recorded agreement or easement approved by the city. And then it has 4 requirements. So my suggestion would be, as a condition of this, that they also provide a shared parking agreement in recordable form that meets that code requirement.
Will you remind me, did we require that of the Bridge
Yeah,
Church?
that's what I was just going to ask. Was that required of Bridge Church as well?
No, I know that came up at the last minute, but this is still my position that it needs to be recordable. Otherwise, it's not enforceable, and our code requires that for shared parking. So they can both get them in place, because if you need it from the bridge, they'll need it from you. And you can both just,
Come on up there
Sure.
for a minute. I'm Bob Snyder. I'm the one who's goddamn working and making things happen and coming over to my lot every single day to count cars.
And I have pictures of every car in the parking lot.
Yes, he
for the
does.
past 23 days.
Photo evidence.
I would have printed them out, but I would have used a gallon of ink to print out over 100 pictures, so. But I have them on my laptop if you want to look at them.
That's what you call dedication. Anyway, just a few things. You know, when I approached our builder about making this expansion to our building, you know, his first thought was parking spaces. But he says, hey, you know, I mean, the church over here, I told him that they came to us for additional parking spaces. And I can't remember what we committed to. I just told them they could use the whole parking lot. Well, no, that's what we got from them. he suggested the number of 12. I could have easily gone to the church and said, hey, can we use your whole parking lot? But they said you only need 12. That ought to be more than sufficient. So I'm not too concerned about that. And I know you're always concerned about, okay, future use, what's going to happen. I made a mistake. I was not paying attention when Bountiful Glass went up for sale, because I would have bought that building. And when all of a sudden I've got a minister pounding on our door saying, I need some of your parking spaces, it was a little depressing. So if the church ever moves or fails, I will buy the building. That would make our life a lot easier, because I know I'm going to need it for future expansion as well. Right now, what we've got is we have 15 employees. We are expanding our space so that, you know, with the additional offices, we can employ 23. Now, that's a little ways down the road, you know, another 8 individuals on board. But that's it. That means there are 23 individuals working for us, 23 cars parked in the parking lot. The requirements of 42 or 43 are just not, in my view, justifiable for the use of our space and what we're going to do. And I know there's always the argument, well, what happens if 10 or 20 years from now you sell that building? My intention is to hang on to that darn thing for as long as I'm alive. So I can't predict when my end will come, but I can't imagine a tenant in the future, even if we were to move on and rent that building, ever saying, I got 73 employees and I'd like to put them all in that parking space, because the building won't hold that and it's not there for accommodation. So I hope you'll kind of weigh some of those into consideration, because think about it. My max with the extension of the building is 23 employees. The space that we have available for our office warehouse, we've got a studio in there. We film our educational classes, and then we distribute those, you know, online to our students all across the United States. So that's never going to turn in, at least as long as I'm in there, for any kind of an office space. I hope that helps give you some perspective on you know, our intent and where we're at. I didn't mean to butt in, but I did want to just mention a few of those things, that if you want me to go to the church and get more parking spaces, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to accommodate. As far as formalizing something, it is a little bit difficult because they've already passed the test. So going back to them and saying, okay, I need you and I to get into a formal arrangement so that we could submit those documents to the city. I don't know how motivated they're going to do it, because you already gave them approval. They're in. And that's one of the challenges I think I'm dealing with.
Bob, if I recall, I think there was in the letters, it was similar to the letter they submitted to you, which was that you could end that agreement with a 30-day notice.
Right.
Not that I would encourage you to ever hold the church hostage with leverage like that, but you know, you could say, I can withdraw my parking thing that I signed you, unless we can both come and record an easement on the plat of the county. That way you could, I mean, if you came to us with an easement that said, you know, we're going to record on their property that we have access on weekdays, and on weekends they have access to ours, then I think that solves.
Well, now help me understand. You know, you say I've got good leverage there, and mind you, if that's the case, that would be. But can I say, I'm going to withdraw my parking spaces? How does that impact the approval you've already given them? Does that all of a sudden,
Madam Chair, hearing some of the discussion, I mean, there's 3 parts to how the parking modification works. One suggestion, because we've talked about a portion of those parking modifications, but one suggestion so you'll be aware of, and I think it's something has merit from my point of view, is that there's also a third aspect of parking. So you have shared because you just have a master planned area. You have shared because you're going off site with someone else. You also have a specific parking count allowance. So a user can say, here's your ordinance, but this is my real need. And if they can show their real need is lower, you can approve the real need lower. Now the advantage of that, and I'm not saying to do it tonight, it's something that we can work out. The advantage of that is if you are relying something on off-site between parties and those failures take place, and you've done an addition and a failure takes place, it's really difficult at that point to render something that's resolvable. But here's the idea. If indeed their count is less than the 42 as argued, have them submit that process to make the argument that it's less than needed. If it meets the merits and the musters and acceptability of the commission, and you approve that, then that count gets recorded on the property so that that's transferred, and we don't have the other issues of other parties being involved. So now you know the addition takes place, it's limiting the flex space, but you have a future if you, we hope it's not till 2050, that's my goal, to make it.
I'm right there with you.
I'm, you know, I hope to 85, and then all bets are off. But if that's the case, then the transfer is that this building and addition is underparked from the count, but you are stuck with this scenario and this many stalls based on this use, and then the future buyer knows that that's the constraint of the approval perpetually.
We have shown on the survey that I did, we use an average of 13.91 spaces a day. And that's the second sheet of the paper I gave you. Yeah. And then I looked at a couple different parking scenarios, 137 and 131, and it still averaged out to 13.91 spaces a day is what we're using. So we're using 14 spaces a day. And these were just generic times, as you can go see. I went over there at different, on Sundays I tried to find when the church was going on, but I only found a couple of cars, as you can see, on Sundays.
They're not holding church yet. They've still been in the process of construction and renovation over there.
But there are, in those counts of that 4, like on the Sundays that are shown, that includes his 3 trailers, because they're taking up spots, so I had to include them in the count.
Man, I would have pulled them out and put them on the street.
Then I would have had to count them on the street, so.
I would have pulled them out, put them on the street in the next block.
So from my perspective, I think that should be explored. Yeah. It may not be the final answer, but I think that scenario should be explored where we count for as much as we can and decide what that parameter is on site and how that perpetually can be managed and disclosed, than where an off-site party agreement could introduce a failure. Because I think on-site and disclosure of what the limitations with the approval and the recorded document are more perpetually sustainable than agreements that might come and go. So I'm not saying that's the right answer, but hearing everything, I think that should be explored.
Corey,
Let me.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead and ask your question. No, go ahead.
In the event that Bob Snyder revoked his agreement with the church to allow them to use parking on Sundays, what does that do to their ability to retain their CUP approval if one of the conditions of approval is no longer valid?
It compromises their approval.
So then they, in essence, could be, in effect, their CUP is revoked if they can't meet all the conditions of approval that it was.
Or they would have to show an alternative acceptable to the city for another scenario, which they have provided that some parking, in addition to what they're required, was other off-site users, and could they obtain that in an acceptable degree to satisfy the CUP, or if it can't, then it would be revoked. So there's some wiggle room for them to at least argue their case before a revocation would occur, but if they can't satisfy it, then it compromises in the revocation would occur.
One last piece of information on that. The tenant, or the owner across the street, coincidentally, was at our meeting just prior to our beginning of our meeting last time, the one who owns all those retail buildings across the street, and he said he had tenants that signed an agreement to give parking when he didn't approve of those, and so I think in effect, and those weren't counted. I think only Renatus' buildings were counted for the approval, but just
Correct.
FYI, I think the owner of the buildings across the street is not inclined to lease property.
Which is why you need a recordable agreement.
Right.
Yeah.
Those were not counted to satisfy the minimum
Right.
stalls.
They had tons of extra at the end. They brought in agreement upon agreement upon agreement.
Right. Turns out Renatus might have been the only,
Legitimate.
and I don't recall the agreement, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
The agreement that we have with Rich Church is the last page before the plan.
Yeah, and it was just.
And there are other versions in the parking modification about agreements too, besides the recordable. So I think that's something we need to go back and analyze. But just hearing it, I think the site-specific user may be the first place we ought to look to see if that can be done. And then if that can't be done or is not seem feasible, then we can come back in with an alternative agreement scenario.
So what you're suggesting is the applicant actually apply for a parking modification?
Correct.
Which is not on the table right now. They're just saying, hey, we can meet that. But that's their argument, is we don't need as many, which would require an application for a parking modification.
So
Could
let me
we
ask.
fill that out right now so we can speed the process along?
Yeah, let me ask you this question then, because
Sure.
and I appreciate all the additional evidence that you've provided to us, but I'm with our city attorney. This is material that I would like for our staff to be able to digest
Sure.
and think through before I would be prepared to make any decision. But it sounds like there are some alternatives for you that might speed up the process and even be a little bit easier, including this application for a parking modification. So would you have any objections if we were to table this matter and allow you to get with Corey and talk about some alternative options and then come back to us
Well, in my meeting with Corey and a few of the staff and the city attorney, I thought we were going to discuss that parking agreement that we have with British Church at this point of this meeting as well.
Yes.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I think it's up to the applicant to decide, do you want to go with the shared parking, which you've proposed tonight, or do you want to go with a parking modification? Or do you want to do both? But those options are up to you.
Well, what we'd like to do is, like you said down here, to streamline the process, we would like to be able to do whatever we have to do so that we can build Bob's building for him, his addition, without moving him out of Centerville, keeping him in the town. So, you know, we have two options there. I like the combined option because even though he says he's only going to grow to 20 some odd people, there's a couple of days every year, you know, 4 or 5 days every year, where he's going to have 40 cars or 30 some odd cars in the parking lot, 31, 32 cars in the parking lot. And that will be very close to what we have there. But as his business grows, you know, he may invite a couple more people in. And I don't want him to say, no, we just hit our maximum parking, you know, we can only have 31. You two cannot come to this meeting. So if we could come with an agreement that if we can do the shared parking and the max parking, I think that's the best way to go for Bob and the city.
I think that also gives you the opportunity to go to the Bridge Community Church, which they've always struck me as being very reasonable. So I would be personally surprised if they told you to pound sand in terms of getting a recorded easement.
You know,
but
they've been pretty good in the past. I haven't dealt with them, my staff has, so I probably need to go over and shake hands and kiss babies.
So I have one more. If we do site-specific, Corey, to allow that parking modification, that does limit what can be developed inside in the future.
That's what gets disclosed.
Applicant is aware is that if that is modified for that level, the amount of office space would be limited by that specific agreement.
And that's what the second floor is for offices, future expansion into offices. Right now, the warehouse level is the part, we call it, is toys.
So all of the square footage on the second level is currently being counted as office in your calculations.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And that's for
It's
future.
just something for you to be aware of as you
Hey, you know what?
consider
I'm
that.
fine with that. I mean, I really am. You know, our business model is really unique, and we've done some great things. I mean, I started this thing 7.5 years ago out of my basement. You know, I turned my exercise room into our corporate offices, and that's where we started and you know, kicked it off the first year. But we've hit the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in America last 2 years, private companies. So, you know, we got some bragging rights there. We just finally, you know, got accepted for our Utah Best of State Gold Award. And I got to go to the banquet last Thursday. So we're making good progress. But the way our business model is designed, we don't need a lot of internal staff. We just don't. And where I'm at right now, I need to beef up our customer care. We have our own in-house general counsel, so I respect your position because I get it from Nicole every single day of my life, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, right? You know, she's going to need help and assistance. I may add another couple of IT individuals because we've got a pretty aggressive IT software development team, and that's about it. So 23, I just don't see us ever moving beyond that. And if we do, well then I'll just need to turn our office into just our studio, and we'll have to find another facility for our people, you know, where we can house them all in one building because I don't want to separate them.
Well, as we get our Shorelands Commerce Park going, we'll invite you over there and expand.
Fortunately, it sounds like you have some options that may satisfy your needs and also resolve
We'd
the
like to
city's
keep his
concerns.
options here in
Yeah, we do
Centerville
wanna keep
instead of
Sure.
going to Farmington that has a lower parking status for us.
Right.
So,
Can I ask a question?
course.
I'm noticing the days that you do have high amounts of parking are film days.
Yep,
How often are you filming?
that's about once a quarter.
Okay, so
we've
every
had-
3 months.
They've had one this year already in the first 5 months of the year.
Because if you add 8 employees, you know, to the 23 and, you know, put that on top of 31 or 32 slots on film days, I guess I'm inclined to think they maybe do need the 42 stalls.
That's why, you know, it's, for those few days that that Bob is recording, we do need the parking from Ridge Church.
Yeah, and I think,
Or that or put 'em out on
I
the
think a
road.
combination scenario might be good, where the predominant is one
Yeah, for
scenario
sure,
and the
right.
spillover is the other
You
scenario.
know,
Yeah.
during my taking pictures every day for the I mean, I was here every single day.
Were you there at the same time? Like, was it pretty
No, you
consistent?
can see on the second page,
Yeah.
I tried to stagger my times.
Okay.
So like,
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. I didn't notice the times. I
Mhm.
apologize.
That's why I say, he's working this
He's-
thing.
So I tried to stagger the time so that, you know, sometimes people are there in the morning and they're not there in the afternoon and vice versa. You know, I can't sit there all day long and count cars coming in and out, so I figured this would be the best way to do it.
Is 9:30 or 10 on film days, is that pretty much everybody's there in the building by
Oh,
then?
yeah, we start at 8:30.
Okay.
When I was there Saturday, there was someone singing in the building, because I heard him outside,
Yeah.
so. I don't know, I guess that's your daughter that does singing.
Yeah, my
lessons.
daughter,
Yeah.
she,
Great. Well, you're welcome to, if you have any additional feedback that you want to give us. Otherwise, I'm inclined to go ahead and move just to table this matter, allow the applicant to get with our, sorry, Corey, I'm blanking
Staff.
on your staff. And I was trying to use your official title, and I just went
Planner.
completely blank, or city
Oh,
planner. And community development director. That
The
technically.
fancy name for,
Yeah, and then you can come back with us,
For planning.
to us, and present it in whether one or the other or a combined option, but that gives you the ability to kind of sit down and allow our staff to
Corey, when
digest.
I meet with you to get this thing going, I don't know if we need what paperwork we need to fill out. Does the city have paperwork for us to fill out?
we can show you the modification. I can even give you the link to it so that you know
Okay.
what to do. But as soon as you can.
Okay, what's tomorrow morning like? I have to leave to go to Logan at about 9:30. Can I meet with you first thing in the morning? I'm there at 6:30, so.
I wish I would say I was there at 6:30, but
When you get my age, it's easy to get up because you never go to bed, so.
I'm just afraid the commission's going to keep me here till midnight. But what time do you have to leave to get on the road?
I have to leave by 9:30 to put me up there for a meeting at 11, so
How about we just communicate over the phone at 9,
that'll work.
and then we can see where we go
Yeah,
from
'cause
there.
I'm only a block from your office,
Yeah.
so.
Let's
what does this mean for our timeline? Because obviously I'm trying to, create some urgency about getting this thing done.
Sure. From my perspective, if you get with staff, we should, Corey, am I
We'll come
am I
back to your next
misspeaking?
meeting.
Yeah, the next meeting is what I was thinking, so 2 weeks from now?
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Lisa, procedural issue, just because I want to make sure that I'm not overstepping anything. This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing. I don't want to forget to do that. Would it be advisable to go ahead and open it for a public hearing now and then table it so that we've handled that public hearing issue, or would?
Yeah, I would still have the public hearing, and then you can make the decision when you table it, whether you want to continue that public hearing or not.
Okay, great.
I can represent the public. I'd be happy to step forward and say, you know what, I love these people, you guys should approve it, because you're gonna think they're awesome.
Our city attorney keeps us straight when it comes to procedural issues. Any other further comments from either of you?
No.
Great. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And I will go ahead and take this opportunity to open the matter to a public hearing. If anyone would like to step forward and speak to this issue.
I
Seeing-
think the public agrees with Bob that
Yes.
this would be a perfect addition to the city.
Seeing no one step forward, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And then I will make a motion to table this matter, and I don't see any reason to continue the public hearing on this particular one. but I'm open to if anyone else has any strong feelings. Okay, I'll entertain a second.
If you, just for procedure, if your
Yes.
next meeting you feel like you needed to reopen that, then you
We
would
could do it.
ask the commission.
Yeah. Does anyone want to second
I'll
my motion?
second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? Starting with Commissioner Wright.
Aye.
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 Great, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, appreciate it.
Madam Chair, can I address the applicants?
Absolutely.
Just
please.
want to compliment Dan. Yeah, we've talked. He's very approachable, very thorough. Unfortunately, as we went through the report time, it wasn't the most positive outcome in a report, but I just wanted to mention that I wish Dan was working on every single project in Centerville from a communication and submittal. He does a great job.
My background's contract law, so in construction. So I've done 8A work for most of my construction lives, general construction life. So I'm used to this.
Great. Thank you both very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving to the next item on our agenda. Looks like the city attorney will discuss the requirements for conceptual and final site plan applications and possible ways to streamline administrative decisions in the future. So we will turn the time over to Lisa Romney.
Thank you. At our last, I think it was 2 meetings ago, we talked about streamlining some of the administrative decisions. And from that meeting, I was given the task to bring back the site plan review process so that you could compare what we require at conceptual site plan and what we require at final site plan. So I've put in the packet for you just a copy of the site plan ordinance. I thought about retyping it out and putting it in a chart, but it's all there. I think you can just read what we require at conceptual, which is enough to give us the idea of whether the project can move forward. And I think tonight is a really good example. I'm really glad we tabled it. What I'm learning with more experience is, you know, we try to do nice things, but it just comes back to bite us because we're not prepared, we didn't review it, et cetera. And I think that's where, you know, I was glad to review the conceptual site plan and see that we do require quite a bit more than I thought, but we really want to get an idea of what's out there, and we put a burden on the applicants to do their due diligence and make sure they know where the utilities are and where they're going to put their buildings and those types of things. So I do think it is a little, you know, they need to put some time and effort into the conceptual plan. And then for final site plan, as you start looking through that very lengthy list, they're starting to expend quite a bit of money in engineering and other items for that final site plan with the grading and drainage. You know, this is all going to be engineering costs, significant cost. So in preparation for this, I also watched the YouTube video of our discussion last time, and it was all over the board. Maybe we should, you know, my original suggestion was that at conceptual, maybe we should have staff just do conceptual and then bring the final to the Planning Commission. But some good points were brought up that, well, wait a minute, we have the public hearing at conceptual. We really want to hear from the public early on. And, you know, sometimes there's things from neighbors that we don't know about. And maybe having Planning Commission do the conceptual and then deferring final to staff. But I think with a lot of these, you know, the example, maybe on small projects that would be fine, but on larger projects, and in my opinion, really on all projects, just, you know, the Quick Quack, a Chick-fil-A, any of them, I think the Planning Commission's going to want to see final site plan. So bottom line, my recommendation is to leave the ordinance as is, unless you would like to see more from final put into the conceptual. But having reread this, I thought that it strikes a good balance. I was also talking with the city manager today, and he mentioned that a few years ago we actually did some streamlining, and his recollection was that site plans, final site plans, used to go to the city council, and we had eliminated that. So I think in the last decade we have, you know, streamlined it from 3 meetings down to 2, and so it's just at the Planning Commission level. But certainly I'm open for other ideas, but I think that, you know, one thing, if we want to speed up our meetings, we could require that applications be more complete when they come to you. Like Corey said, we're always trying to meet that deadline and hurry up and get it in the packet. That's my only thought of, you know, if the idea is that we want things to be faster at the Planning Commission, but, you know, every project has a property owner and has a vested interest, and I think they just want, you know, they want and need to be heard as well. You know, this is a big issue, and everyone has their own little issue with their project, whether it's the architectural features for Quick Quack, or the parking for Renatus, or, you know, the traffic for Walmart. So my recommendation is to leave it as is, but I'm open to any thoughts from the commission, or if you'd like me to come back with something else.
Also, if I could add just one historical vignette to the site plan process. When I arrived here for the city back in 2004, the conceptual site plan approval and the final site plan approval were simply constructed of, you do conceptual, you do final, here's all the parameters. But it didn't say whether it could be combined and uncombined. So what was happening early on is a lot of folks were saying, look, it's fairly simple. Can I just do conceptual and final together? That'll speed efficiency, getting things done. Sometimes on a small project, staff would, suggest that. We made recommendations. Hey, do conceptual and final together if you're comfortable. And as we found through time, with this undefined parameter combining, I wouldn't say it was a regular request, but it was a frequent request. And what really became difficult is well, they did it for this project, why can't you do it for me? And what we started finding out is that the public felt it was somewhat disingenuous to them, because they're arriving at conceptual trying to give their opinion. The developers already spent all the money on engineering for final because it got combined together, and the Planning Commission's saying back to the perception, yes, you can do it, it's administrative, and they're like, well, what is all this for, and what is it about, because nobody's ever listening to us. So that was the public perception is we weren't taking the time to make sure they were being heard. Here's the other flip side of it. On staff's point of view, for lack of better terms, we throw you under the bus. And how we throw you under the bus is we say, well, you've got to convince 7 people that this is okay, and we don't think it's okay. So our goal on our end is to get you a product that can be approved, but at the same time, we're saying it's 7 people, and we don't think you meet this. And there's an incentive when they approach you of like, oh, I got to get to a majority of 7 votes. What are they worried about? And that's what we use sometimes to get them to up their game in the commitment of what they're planning and doing, and take a serious look at an ordinance, because we'll call out and say, right here, we think this is important to them. And they're like, oh, okay. And I know that sounds manipulative, but it's the human communication. If they can think they can do it on one fell swoop, and because this is what's common. Well, if you say it's okay, they'll probably approve it, because that's the way we do it in the past. And I don't. I say this is the individual community. There's 7 of them, and they're pretty good at what they do, and they don't always rubber stamp staff. Now, you decide whether that's true or not. But I think it's good to split that out, to have that pressure, to have that separation, so that they realize that this isn't just a hurdle of government bureaucracy. It's a participatory process, and they have to make the case that they've met city ordinances. So in some sense, in previous, we were streamlining it by default, and we purposely held it back and split it into 2. I think the only place that I think that faults the 2-step, these unintended consequences, is the site plan for residential permit for a house on a lot gets forced into conceptual and final. And that's the only place, sometimes that works to have it split, but that's the one place where I think a lot of it is really just getting the easements, getting the impact fees, making sure the engineering is done. And a 2-step process for that can be a little bit arduous. So that's the only place I would maybe recombine them back together, but We did split it out into 2 steps, which lengthens the time to get approved.
Yeah, but often on those are the single lot development that are not really seasoned developers. Sometimes we're dealing with just the home, you know, the person that bought the lot, and they have no idea that they have to get easements and other things, but anyway. I think that this was a good exercise, because I will admit that in my mind, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to put conceptual site plan at a staff level, but through this process, I've been convinced that actually our ordinances work, and they provide the public input up front. And so at least it was a good exercise for me. I don't know about you.
Lisa, when you said that, you know, sometimes these people don't realize they have to get easements and such, what does the process look like for them? Don't they have like a checklist, or, you know, as part of the, you know, when they're putting in their application, it says do this, this, and this, and this, right?
I haven't been involved in the applications or the checklist, but I know Brandon prepared a lengthy set, but we haven't, I haven't reviewed what's in the packet.
Do you feel like they get all the information they need, saying, make sure you do all this? Or do they come to you frequently and be like, and you're saying, well, why don't you have this? Or why do you not have that?
An honest answer to it is, if you're dealing with somebody that's interested in buying a lot from a neighbor, it doesn't matter what you put in the ordinances. It's completely foreign and difficult for them. We have an application, we have a checklist, we have a brief, a little summary brief that describes the process and the steps, and it's just always overwhelming for a homeowner buying a lot. You know, the struggle that they have is that here's a lot for sale, and what they generally don't understand is that they're buying that property as is, and in that buying as it as is without the infrastructure and easement, or is it as is in the normal retail market of a subdivision lot? And that's a common discussion with most folks trying to build a home on a raw lot, is that they're being somewhere in the neighborhood of a retail price of the lot, and it takes them a while to understand that, you know, there's a $10,000 to $30,000 expenditure to prepare that lot for a home, depending on what's going on with the property, and that's usually the most shocking to
but
them.
they do have a checklist as part, and a brief as part of
But they have to
the
submit.
Application, and then obviously they should go to the actual ordinance.
Yeah,
and see that,
the difficult part for them is the checklist is something that's like, well, I can get a map for that, and I can get a map for this. Where the difficulty arrives is when we say preliminary utility plan. You know, well, there's water and sewer in the street, right? Well, yeah, but you might have to cut all the way across the street to tap into the sewer or to the water. And so getting a civil engineer to understand that they have to prepare, and that expenditure, that's where, well, I have to pay for that? Well, why isn't the seller paying for that? Well, that's the discussion between you and the seller. And that's the most difficult part, is the getting the civil engineer involved, preparing the plan.
I want to say that I really appreciate staff for doing a deep dive in this, and I think that the historical perspective was really helpful, because I don't think that we always have to make change just to make change, and I think that our intent here was to fine-tune it if there were places where we could fine-tune it, and it sounds to me like, looking back historically, we kind of have made those fine-tunes over the way, and I definitely don't want to make a change just to make a change. So I keep going back in my head, I keep thinking of that phrase, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? And maybe this is one of those areas where it's not broke and it works fine, and we've developed a system that works over time, but it's still good to do a deep dive and make sure that we're comfortable with it. So,
and I mean, I agree with you on that, and I don't want to change things if we don't have to, but if there's a possibility of giving the zoning administrator the option of combining the conceptual and final for just residential lot development.
If you're interested in that, what I would say is instruct staff
but not that
to
it
go,
would have to be, that it would just
instruct staff to go to the DRC and come up with a recommendation on whether we think that's the right direction to go or not.
Okay, yeah, that seems reasonable. I would probably go one way or the other rather than, well, we can discuss it, but you know, those do not come up very often. I'm still very much in favor of that process following site plan. I think it's a necessary tool to make sure they get all the infrastructure for a parcel outside of a platted subdivision, but whether it's one step or two step, I think we could look at that.
And I think the Development Review Committee can look at what are those roles, how complex they are, is it really a two-step process? I'd be even willing to share with the DRC, is that something that's more along a permitted use process? That'll make some people uncomfortable, but I think we can explore it and then recommend the alternatives and which ones we prefer in that scenario.
How does the commission feel about having staff do one last look at this area with regard to the residential in connection with the DRC?
I actually want to voice something about the process in whole from the perspective of the developer. In fact, I think I just handed Corey an application, a revised application, due to an incomplete submittal with the project at Legacy Commons today. And as I've thought about it, I think there is a ton of value in the conceptual thing, the conceptual site plan coming to the commission, because oftentimes the commission can have such an impact on what they value and think is important that it is critical, I think, to come to the commission first and understand. You may read the ordinance and think, okay, this project could fit like this, but you come to the commission and the way they look at it and the things they value could be a whole different ballgame. And so I think it's important to come to conceptual. However, I don't think that we should require so much at the conceptual phase. City staff understandably wants as many T's and I's crossed ahead of time as they can, which makes sense. They're trying to cover their bases, they're trying to answer questions. From the other perspective though, from a landowner's perspective, maybe more dramatic in the case of an individual homeowner than a rich family, but or developer. But these things aren't cheap. I mean, they're not cheap. As I read through the conceptual items that are supposed to be put together, we say preliminary landscape plan, preliminary utility plan, but when we go to our engineers and we say we need a preliminary utility plan, they say, well, what's the difference from a real utility plan? And we say, well, we don't know. Put together a utility plan. And we pay for the utility plan at the conceptual stage, which can then bite us badly when you come to the commission and it turns out this was really important and we need to shift the whole site or do something to change that, and then you just got to bill the engineer to redo the whole utility plan, redo this and that. So I would be inclined if there was a way to reduce the requirements of conceptual but ensure that it comes to the commission still.
What specific elements would you remove from the list?
Or simplify.
Right. I mean, because I think of the preliminary, right, the preliminary,
Conception.
well, yeah, like in terms of the preliminary, landscaping or whatnot. I mean, we've seen things from individual homeowners that are not professionally done, that are very just hand-drawn, right, that we've accepted because we've recognized that it was conceptual. And I recognize that businesses may go above and beyond that because they're businesses, right, but that it's not necessarily required by our ordinances. So.
Yeah, I think I would allow the option for a narrative of these items rather than shown on 24 by 36, construction drawings, for example, a narrative that discusses the concept that you're talking about. And I understand that a drawing can help with that. And maybe, Corey, we've misinterpreted that a little bit. Maybe you could have a little bit more hand-drawn shebang. But sometimes when you're dealing with a large site and you got to make decisions on the landscaping, it kind of takes high-level analysis to sort that out. So,
if I may, giving Logan credit to some of the experience, I think he does raise an issue that the professional world, I'm not saying they misinterpret what it is, but it lies on how they interact. And when we say preliminary utility plan, we're just wanting to know where the utilities are located and how and preliminarily what you think you have to draw to it. Now, if you go to somebody who's not, I use this favorite word this week, astute, they just go in and try to draw something on a map where it goes into. If you walk into an engineer's office and say preliminary utility plan, in some ways in their mind is like, well, I've got to go out, I've got to discover where the lines are. That's going to cost a certain money to go call the different entities to put where those lines are, get a hold of their maps, understand where it is, And there's an expense involved in that. And sometimes as they get into that expense to drop those 24 by 36 sheets, what I see actually happens is our development review committee, our staff, who are engineers and looking at those sheets, as they look at a 24 by 36 sheet, they're not just looking at, oh, the water's on the other side of the street. They start looking in, oh, is this an 8-inch line? Is this a 12-inch line? And so you do have some of this conceptual place where the other team members are already talking down the road to the next step. And the engineers are responding to that next step. And so I think it's a combination of how the outside engineers perceive what preliminary utility plan means, so maybe we need to do a better definition of what that is. And it's also the issue of by the time professionals start talking to each other, they're mentally past that the green means this and a blue line means that. They're already saying, I don't know if an 8-inch line is going to deliver the stuff here, which is more the final site plan construction world.
Yeah, and I do think it's helpful to hear from you know, practitioners and developers, but I do think that there's already the wiggle room in the ordinances, because again, I agree on the utility plan. There's some wiggle room there. It says a preliminary utility plan including water, sewer, and storm drainage plans, including availability of utilities. But let's take, for instance, the Dave Bell property. That utility plan is significant. I mean, on some properties, we do need to know not just where are they, but how are you going to get those utilities to your piece of property? And I do think that's an important piece of conceptual, because if you can't get the utilities there, we don't even need to go to final. Now, I'm not saying, you know, you can always solve those things, but we have had a lot of projects where we sit in the DRC and say, how are you going to get the sewer? Where are you going to take your, you know, a lot of those lines? And I think the Dave Bell property is a good example, because they have some issues with, you know, drainage.
They've got to get under the gas pipe to begin with. We don't even know how that's going to work.
Yeah, but I do think if they just, I'm not sure if we're requiring engineered drawings, but they do need to show where the utilities are in the street, in my opinion, and then just a drawing of how do you anticipate it getting to the edge of your property. I don't think it has to be engineered, because we don't even know what you're, you know, I mean, you've got the layout, but generally we can get water, that's the way I read it, we can get water, sewer, and storm drainage to the property.
Yeah, I think that's the intent. I think when you deal with the engineers, the ordering work orders from a developer to an engineer, they're out there saying, well, if we're going to go research all this information, you know, your charge is, you know, 3/4 already to a construction drawing.
That's right.
Yeah. And then under the landscaping, it says the location, arrangement, and layout of landscaping and open space. And here again, we're not looking for a landscape architect on the landscaping plan, but we need enough information to make sure that you can provide the required percentage of landscaping and get your parking and get your buildings. We are kind of looking at that at conceptual, you know, in a big picture sort of way. And I think the Renatus building is an example of that. You know, we needed enough description of the location and percentage of landscaping so that we could make some parking calculations. So.
Yeah, well, it's one thing to say that that doesn't require a professional landscaping plan, but to answer those questions, it kind of requires, I mean, to get all that squared away, as talented as developers are individually, their analysis can struggle. And so you kind of got to go out and answer that. So I don't know the answer exactly. We've just dealt with this, and not only with Centerville. It's not like Centerville's a lone wolf in this regard either. So I don't know the answer. But I thought what we did with Renatus today was so valuable that they got what the commission was worried about. They could talk about it. The challenge is it takes 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes to get to the commission with that. And so with questions like, is this pipe too big? How do we get over and under? That can be a discussion in 15 minutes between 2 engineers. But if you need feedback from the planning commission, it's like you're running with a project, and then you hit this wall 4 weeks later. You get finally the nugget you were looking for that could change the whole project. So I don't know the solution. I'll have to think about it. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure that didn't go on.
Is there any way that we could just reword it so that it still is a requirement, but that it's helping people understand that it is conceptual, it is preliminary. Would you recommend anything, Lisa, as far as
I like the
rewording?
way it's drafted. Maybe it's more, I think some developers will want to go, I mean, sometimes at conceptual, we get the full deal. I mean, they've expended
They've
a lot
already
of-
engineered it at conceptual.
Yeah, they've already engineered it, and then sometimes we get a hand-drawn piece of paper. And then we have to help them say, no, you're gonna have to get a little bit more detailed on the utility. But, you know, in my mind, preliminary is trying to modify utility plan, meaning we understand, I mean, from some sense, they probably do need to talk to an engineer. I mean, they need to talk to an engineer because we're already requiring topography. We're requiring some, you know, other engineering type questions, so.
Yeah, when we talk about whether there's wetlands and other sensitive issues, what's your floodplain, you know, that takes a little bit of time and work that seems meaningless to somebody at a conceptual level to some degree, but is meaningful for staff to be able to provide a report of what the concerns in the future might be. You know, the other aspect I think is Logan raises is, you know, it takes 3 weeks to get to where the golden nugget is, and we've put so much effort, and there's, you know, I mean, by the time they're doing their plans and getting prepared, you know, it's lucky that they're getting it a week before the submittal, you know, sometimes maybe it's 2 weeks before the submittal. So you got 4, 5, 6 weeks of work before they can get the golden nugget. But the other side of the story is they're also the community that's gone to the state legislature and say, we want to be more informed of what staff is doing and what they're going. We don't like showing up to the meeting and seeing a staff report that just tells us no, and we had no advance notice because we don't even know where the city's going. So now you have to publish a report. It has to be a certain time frame before the meeting. Here's the notices, here's the hearings. And so the 3 weeks for them is like, I've got this submittal in, and it's taking 3 weeks to get to this point, but they don't really appreciate that they're part of the scenario that adds the 3 weeks to the development, because we have to write a report. It has to be given to you 3 business days before the meeting. You know, we have to notice, we have to meet this for the public hearing to meet the public disclosure. And so they meet with us, and then they're waiting, Friday get a report. Well, in between, we're noticing, we're publicizing, we're setting up the Novus agenda, we're posting the site, you know, we're doing all those things, we're writing the reports. And 3 weeks is where the city side of the staff is, and this is a frequent, you guys are moving too fast. You planners, you make it difficult for us because we just barely found out that this project is going, and I don't have time on my workloads to get this done, and you guys are moving way too fast for us. And I'm already writing a report and saying, if you don't get something to me, it's not going to end up in the conditions. And, you know, there's a roll of the eyes and saying, we like you, Corey, but you stress us. And so there's frictions on both sides of what's going on. So I don't know the answer is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Well, we both spent a lot of time coming to the conclusion that we don't know the answer. So.
Yeah.
Do you see any other city doing it differently?
A lot of cities will let you combine conceptual and final. Some cities don't seem to have a conceptual thing. It's kind of like final. Some cities allow an easier process to get to the planning commission. You know, some cities encourage you to call them and talk to them, or they have neighborhood representatives that kind of represent. Centerville's not as big as some of those cities. So
But I'll also say on those cities that, you know, you may get faster to the planning commission, or you may be able to talk on the phone. They're not getting vested rights at conceptual. And I've always interpreted, if you apply with a conceptual plan and it's completed, that in Centerville you get vested rights at conceptual. And that's not true for a lot of cities.
Is that by ordinance that we feel like that's the case?
I think that's in our ordinance, well, and it's the way I'm interpreting under the case law. Now, I know some cities are still saying, no, we're not gonna, so the word now at some of these land use task force meetings I'm going to, they're saying, you know, don't accept the conceptual or approve it. You just look at it and give some comments, and therefore they don't obtain any vested rights. But we have a process that we get enough information that we can make an educated decision based upon staff's analysis to actually approve it, and then give them vested rights to pursue final, meaning we can't change our ordinances in the middle of the game.
Right.
Yeah, if memory serves, that argument came up with the Hafoka property.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I remember that attorney standing up there saying, you gave us conceptual approval. I don't know that the blood went from Lisa's face, but I remember looking over and thinking, is that true? Do they have vested rights? And I think you expressed that there is an argument there.
In my opinion, I just think the safer way and the fair way is, yeah, I mean, if we have an ordinance that says you need to provide these things, and then they come into us and they meet all of those items, it's not fair in my mind to change the rules just because we found out, you know, there was a loophole that we hadn't thought of.
Is it possible?
But we can fix that loophole after the fact, but the first person in gets to go through.
What about the planning commission having like, and I swear I'm done, this is my last thing to say, something like the city council does. They have like their 5 minutes of come and chew us out about whatever you want type of a thing. You know, is there a way that you could, with no expectation of approvals or anything like that, that you could come and put things before the commission to look at and to give input on?
I don't think that's, well, to me, those create more harm and confusion than good, because you're going to have individual commissioners just saying whatever they want. From a legal aspect, it, you know, drains the blood from my face, because are you looking at the ordinances? Have you had a staff analysis? Do you even know the facts? That's the other thing. When people call community development, we don't know until they put the facts in writing in an application. It's all hypothetical, and they're going to hear whatever they want to hear on their hypothetical facts of the answer. So
yeah, Lisa and I just sat with a dispute, and that's the very thing that they're claiming, is that they called the city and the city said it was okay. The facts of the matter are showing something very
so the two
starkly
parties
different.
entered into a contract based upon that phone call, and then they were not allowed to do what they wanted to do based upon subsequent city opinion in writing. And now the two parties are suing each other, and the city's right in the middle, and will probably be deposed and called in as witnesses as what did we say. But again, in my opinion, whatever we give over the phone is just advice. It's not going to be something that people should enter into contracts over until they actually file an application.
I'm very much in favor of not doing something that would open up the city to being sued. So I would be not.
But I do understand that communication, and I think that the DRC, as frustrating as it is, again, this is a development review committee meeting. We meet every Monday morning with any developer that wants to come in and talk about things. And in my opinion, that is a benefit that Centerville's providing. I don't particularly enjoy those meetings, but we're trying to help the developers answer the questions, and they can come in.
And you give advice in those meetings and stuff?
Right, we'll look at their applications, and, you know, I'll weigh in on the ordinances and the engineer, you know, but it's all just
before
on the
they
fly.
actually submit,
We're just responding to what they're putting in front of us, but and trying to help them.
Okay, cool.
And we also provide that as an opportunity. The theory is we'll provide one free meeting with the DRC to answer any questions and concerns without any application. That really turns into 5 or 6 or 7 meetings, not paying for anything. It's an interesting process, but I think that's also frustrating for developers, because, you know, there is disdain for staff. They have a feeling that staff can be obstinate and difficult, and if they can just get past the staff to the people that have sense in their minds, that they can move it across faster.
That's only in Layton, Corey. That's not in
Are you talking
Centerville.
about the planning commission?
We have sense.
Yeah. So there, you know, it's like, yeah, you guys always want the world. We need to go to the commission and find out what they're really going to ask, because we know we have to get their approval.
All right.
Lisa, can I ask a question? So obviously you're saying if the way that we currently do this, conceptual, the developer has some vested rights. If we were to simplify this and they didn't have vested rights, I mean, I look at it and go, if it's a simpler process and they can get through it faster, I guess I'm trying to understand is it worth it to give up the vested rights because they can move through the process faster?
Well, the vested rights, my opinion, is if we're filing an application and it comes to the Planning Commission, I think that that's an application and you approve it. I mean, if we want meaningful response, you need to accept it or approve it. So I'm not really willing to advise that the city go to one of these scenarios where they don't obtain vested rights at conceptual. I think you could do that, but in my opinion, you're sort of pushing the legal limit, and we would have to be very careful and cute about how we accomplish that. I know lots of cities do it, and they find a legal way, but I would rather just provide the vested rights. I think that's
I agree with Lisa. The case law is pretty disciplined, and it's getting lengthier. The state legislature and the expectation of municipal power and control. I think it's not too far down the road where the state legislature will say, if an application comes in and is complete, because they're doing it with the building permits right now. They've been after the building permits process. The city has only so much time on residential permits to review it, and if we fail, they get to move forward automatically. It doesn't get them out of codes issues, but it foregoes the right for the city to have a say early on, and now we have to do field changes. I think it's not too far around the corner that any application that comes into the city, you have to review in a certain period, or you forego your right to comment on that portion of the application.
Now, simplifying, I guess, you know, we could review our forms and make sure that every single thing in here is spelled out in layman's terms, so that they have a 5-page checklist. We could do that. I haven't reviewed it lately, but from what Corey's saying is they don't always look at it. And
yeah, I'm not suggesting that. I was just wondering if other cities are doing a more simplified process which removes their vested rights. Is that something we want to look at? It certainly sounds like it's not, based on the way the law is possible.
The other cities are doing it, yes. I don't recommend we go that direction.
Okay.
So we have had a proposal. Becky has suggested that, at least with regard to the residential properties, that we have our staff look at discussing with the DRC whether we should combine the conceptual and final site plan approvals. I personally don't have strong feelings on that one way or the other. I don't think that those come up a ton.
Neither do I, really. I was just...
But I am certainly happy to entertain if others want to look at that. I don't think that there's any harm. Does anybody have any objections to sending it to having staff get with the DRC and see if maybe that's one small tweak that we could make? Not seeing any then.
I don't know that it's necessary. I think we do have something that has been fine-tuned, and we're looking for everything, but creating a lot of work for staff, and in the end we're finding that we have a good system. So I don't think it's necessary personally from my vantage.
Logan, Gina?
I think I tend to agree with Kathy. I think it's a good system. It sounds like that the research we've done is that we have a good system in place, and I know there's frustration when they're coming to the DRC and trying to get those things in. I wish we could make that simpler for them, but sometimes that's really what really protects the city and neighbors and the homeowner themselves or the developer themselves in the end. So.
At least is busy enough with the subdivision changes too. So I mean,
well, and Corey,
well then let's
Corey's going to be talking about table of uses and trails, and we've got a lot of other things definitely on our plate. So
I think that's fine. Let's not direct staff. I will just give my opinion on what we just talked about, and I totally respect Lisa's opinion on keeping the city safe. I probably am saying this with limited understanding, so I recognize that. But I sort of like the idea of having it simpler in the conceptual and not having the vested rights, just simply because I don't like my hands being tied as a planning commission. That, yes, we approved it conceptual, which means then the hands are tied. We feel like our hands are tied. I felt like with HOFOCA that seemed to be our hands are tied situation. And I wasn't personally on the commission or here, but from what I've read in the minutes, And the information that basically just heard, it just seemed like the hands were tied. And that seemed like a not great situation to be in as far as the commission is concerned. The other reason why I feel like that it might not be great is that from the developer standpoint, you're putting all of this in to this conceptual. Yeah, you get these vested rights, but you're fronting all of this cost. So while it may be the safer route, and I totally respect that, and I totally agree with that perspective, I still don't think that it necessarily, just because it's safer, I don't know if it's necessarily the best route for not just a developer, but for just any applicant and for the planning commission. I mean, that's just my perspective on things. I know that we don't have to talk about this anymore, but I just wanted to make sure that I got my perspective out there. So.
Thank you again to staff for doing that deep dive on the site plan review process. So we'll go ahead now and move to item number 4 on our agenda, which is a discussion of the City Council goals and work session follow-up. And I am going to turn the time over to Corey to give us a brief summary. I mean, I know that I think all of us, except for Becky, were there. But go ahead, just to summarize it.
Sure, just for beginnings, Cassie's kicked me in the ankle, and I got to get you out of here by 8:45, at least that I don't cause it to go past 8:45. So I'll let you get forward. Real quick, in the work session, I think overall it was productive. I hope I delivered some of the deliverables I talked previously to the commission about and commitments, and seeing if we could get the council to give us directive. So here's my summary, and then those who attended can chime in real quick. I think there was the commitment for the Main Street use list. Cassie presented a very narrow list of highlighted items that were relatively in common, with at least 50% of them voting for permitted or CUP status for uses. The council said, yes, go ahead with that. There was a commitment on our part not to finish it, but we could probably get this on its way and substantially through the process to within a couple of months, is what I heard with that. The directive of the council is they want a little bit of extra notice and some materials publication, particularly the idea of what's the difference between a permitted use and a conditional use on there. They also want us to make sure that we describe in this notice, in this extra notice period, that these are not decided uses being driven by someone. They're the considerations of the city to talk about Main Street and the viability of it. So this is not saying this is a yes or a no, but we want the broad discussion of the success of Main Street, and these uses are part of that debated process from that perspective. Some of the things I think yet to decide at the commission level. There was talk, we could certainly prepare publication materials, posting materials, putting signs out, things of that nature in preparation for your hearing process. I think what we committed to is that we would discuss that at one meeting, allow additional comment period till at least a second meeting before a decision is made. The question that I think is debated is do we want to have something, for an example, the night of the first hearing, spend 45 minutes before the meeting and have some materials and some lists and some discussions so that people can come in and ask some questions in preparation for the public hearing. So more of an open forum, maybe not an open house of saying, gee, what would you like? I think it's narrowed down to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. Here's the use list, here's the definitions. Look these over so that when you participate in tonight's hearing, if that's what you, and we'll probably receive a comment all the way to a subsequent meeting, you can participate in positive discussion about that use list. So that's what I heard from them on the Main Street uses. They kept that idea that the South Main Street corridor is still on the plate of keeping, modifying, getting rid of. That's still a big ticket item to take place. Some other things that were talked about that I heard at the meeting is the West Centerville Neighborhood Plan. We disclosed that there is some transfer potentially of property from Masco to Hogan to continue some steel fabrication. I had a lovely discussion with them today about some enforcement issues. So we'll see how that pans out. What I heard is maybe the West Centerville plan isn't as immediate as we thought, but there was still feedback of we still ought to plan, but maybe instead of necessarily completing it in the next 2 months, we have a little bit of time to do something with the West Centerville plan. Also, what I heard last night is that a part of your trails work session, there has been a recent acceptance of the Parks Committee and Trails Committee have joined up with Bountiful, Farmington, and I think West Bountiful joined into that group as a active transportation plan. So the county will be participating where they've got a grant from Wasatch Front Regional Council to come up with an active transportation plan. That is still much more regional tie-in to some local infrastructure with bike lanes, bus stops, trails. But I think there's also room that as that plan is going along, we'll be gleaning that out into amendments to our general plan. We also need to look as the Trails Committee is a stakeholder, and now the general public also, in addition, is a stakeholder in the general plan, and look at some additional community pathways and elements that can hitch with that master plan of an active transportation. And that's something that they're ensuing to begin in the near future. So still keep your work session with the Trails Committee, finding out where they are in that status, and then this commission helping them as they prepare the finalization of that study. We start implementing it into our Parks Master Plan, our Trails Master Plan elements of our, so I think that's something that will ensue within the next year as a goal. From there, I didn't hear a lot of specific, staff gave, if you read the background, a lot of different elements that are either unfinished. A lot of that stayed by the wayside and didn't rise to a level, including the Southwest Community Plan. I did not hear that high on the table. So I do think it's active transportation and community, maybe a somewhat near future of the West Centerville Plan, and definitely immediate future on the South Main Street Plan. The Foothills property is underway, so that was a high-level planning.
The what?
The city property of the Foothills.
Foothills.
That's a high-level planning underway to be done by next spring. But those are kind of the highlights. There was a considerable amount of time of circular discussion on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. I'll let you decide how much you want to circulate that discussion, but I don't think it resolved itself at all. So I think those are the highlights I heard.
Yeah. I suspect that the ADUs will be coming to us at some point, later rather than sooner, but I agree with you. I don't think that that's on the horizon. The only other thing that I would touch on is the administrative process amendments.
Yes.
We disclosed to the City Council that we were looking at streamlining and making some administrative decisions like the Snow Shack approval, push that down to the staff level, and I didn't hear any kickback on that at all from the City Council. It seemed to me like they were amenable to that idea, so I think that
I think they said basically, sure, go for that.
That was my takeaway, was that we have the green light there to go ahead and proceed with what we're doing.
Correct.
So.
Good point.
Yeah, so on the amending table, thank you very much for that summary, Corey. That's really consistent with what I heard as well. So I think that next thing that we have to do is to move forward on amending this table of uses. And so in my mind, the next thing is let's go ahead and start getting notice out to the public. And I guess that was my only question. Maybe did you guys have a different recollection? Were you thinking 2 actual formal meetings? Because I was thinking that the City Council was thinking 1 more sort of informal meeting, like an open house where we could gather intelligence and then do an actual public hearing, but not make any decisions at that first public hearing, get all the input, and then actually bump it up to them on the second public hearing.
That's
Is that
what I've
consistent?
heard.
Okay.
That's consistent with
That's
what I heard.
consistent with what you've heard. So I'd love for
a public meeting before a planning commission meeting where it's discussed, right?
Right. So open house or some type of informal meeting followed by an actual formal planning commission meeting where we open it up for public hearing, but we don't make any decisions at that first planning commission meeting, followed by a second planning commission meeting where we take all the input that we've heard from the open house and the first meeting and then make a decision to make a recommendation to push up to the city council.
That's what I heard, yeah.
So I would love for staff then to propose for us at our next planning commission meeting. Let's try to propose some dates, get some open house dates going. I think, I don't know, what do you guys think? I mean, the idea of, we could do 2 planning commission meetings where we have hearings and do the first, I mean, actually thinking 3, right? So 2 actual planning commission meetings that are dedicated to doing nothing but hearing public comment, but do like a 30-minute open house educational type thing before the first planning commission.
That's one way. That's what I thought.
Hearing.
I'll defer to you and Corey, you and staff to come up with that plan. I'm fine with you deciding that.
I think from our perspective, I would have us report to you at the next meeting with a timeline and our approach to the notice and communication.
And as you're considering that, I like that, Corey, and as you're considering the notice, consider whether it makes sense to send out specific invitations to the business owners to come perhaps to the second planning commission meeting where they're giving input, where they will be specifically invited to step forward, kind of like what we did.
That's a good idea.
Kind of like what we did with the Main Street plan, right? Because they may
hear from the property owners, hear from the business owners,
Yep.
and then and a general public meeting for anybody that wants to attend. I think that's, yeah, we'll strategize and make some suggestions by your next meeting so that you can go over that, refine it, and then we'll begin to strategically implement that. I do think we would do some extra noticing. I like the idea of maybe potentially separating it, but I still think because it does affect the Main Street property owners as well as the business owners, we treat it, the use list, similar to what we did with Pages Lane and invite them to participate. I do think posting something of the explanation and the purpose on the website to be included in those notices that go out is another thing that is important.
As you're putting together that timeline, I would like to see not only your proposal on the timeline and what will happen along that timeline, but also your proposals for providing notice. Because there are a number of different ways that we could do that. Website, Facebook, the mailer that goes out in the utilities, posting the little yellow signs in front of, properties up and down. So I'd love for your recommendations and thoughts on getting the notice out too.
And then we'll try to scenario, if you do this, this will be the timeline. If you do this, this would be a timeline.
Perfect. Okay. Anyone else have any further comments on this particular topic?
And the other thing I'd add to it is we still committed at staff level to do the backup information of the West Centerville plan for one of your June meetings.
I still would like to see that, but I think that prioritize this table of use timeline. Let's go ahead and get that in the works first. But I agree. I don't want you to forget the West Side historical overview.
Now, you're forgetting another important goal that we committed to.
Oh, yes, Lisa wanted to change.
Which is the subdivision ordinance. We need to resurrect that.
I'm leaving Lisa out. I got her excited, and now I'm deflating her by leaving her out.
I already pulled out my huge file on this today and been sending off emails. But essentially, we hired a consultant in 2016, and the DRC worked with that consultant. We have an entire draft of the subdivision ordinance. It still needs work on some of the more difficult items, but we have that draft. It's 17 chapters, less one, since we've now repealed the flag lot ordinance, but back then it addressed the whole flag lot issue. So I just wanted to know, my plan is to take a couple chapters a week to DRC. We meet every Monday, and after those grueling meetings, we will then tackle the subdivision ordinance. So as long as they will participate in that, we can take a couple chapters a week, which would take us, a few weeks. I have some where I've put 3 or 4 if they're easy chapters. So about a 2 to 3 month process with the DRC to really finalize all the language, and it now has to be updated with the 2017 and 2018 legislation. But I was just wondering what involvement the Planning Commission would like. Initially, when we were drafting it with the consultant, we just said, hey, this is an administrative thing and it's, legal language. Let's just draft it and take the whole thing to the Planning Commission. This Planning Commission seems a little more proactive. I don't know if you want me to bring chapters to you throughout the year, or if you want us to just bring you the end product when we're done in September or August.
Highlight the significant
yeah.
changes or something.
I don't know. I am happy to do it either way. I mean, it strikes me that it's, you know, easier to eat an elephant one bite at a time. So the idea of breaking it up just from my being able to focus substantively on each thing, I think would be more useful that way. But at the same time, I also wouldn't mind standing back and seeing the entire thing in context and having you point out the significant things. I don't have strong feelings either way. Commission, what are your guys' thoughts? Do you have preference?
I will again defer to the chair on these sort of little decisions. I think you just give it to us and we'll do we'll do it in the format that you want to do it. I'm good.
Well, why don't we just wait and see then? If you don't, you know, because it is a commitment to, you know, if you want to read it, it's easier to read in steps. But why don't we see how it goes with the DRC, and we could just bring a few chapters and see how you like the feedback or not. But, you know, for instance, we may want to bring the 3 chapters where we have conceptual, preliminary, and final, and just run our ideas by you and say, look, we're proposing some major changes, here they are. Are you guys okay with that process, and discuss the pros and cons, but not have a intimate, you know, look unless you'd like to.
I like that. That's good. And I'm inclined to defer to your judgment on this issue in terms of what feedback would be helpful from us, okay. Right? So if it's helpful for you to have us dig in and give you thoughts along the way, we're happy to do that. And if you would prefer to just kind of wait until the end, we can do that. I like the idea of you bringing those 3 specific sections to us, though, at least.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much. And oh, we blew our 8:45 deadline, but that's okay. We're close. So let me make sure sometimes. So we're doing the next up on the agenda is the Community Development Director's report. So we'll turn the time over to
You've heard
staff.
it.
Yep. Anything else?
Cassie, is there items that you want to highlight for the next meeting? I don't remember what's. I think we have Legacy Commons is finishing up their submittal. I'm not sure what date we can schedule that. What are some of the others? We have a rezone application for the Bell property behind the Dave's Auto.
I think right now we have that you'll do the West Centerville.
Yeah, we've tagged the West Centerville timeline as something to bring back. But you have another meeting, so.
Has the city council looked at the fence height issue?
Their next meeting.
Got it.
That's scheduled for the June 5th. Okay. At their last meeting, they did approve the Dave Bell rezone. There wasn't anyone there to speak from the public on that. And they also approved, after much discussion, the Pages Lane general plan amendment.
Good. Okay, and thank you very much. Appreciate it. Turning to the last item on our agenda, we'll go ahead and review the Planning Commission minutes for May 9th. So as always, we'll start at page 1 and just go through page by page. So any changes to page 1? Page 2?
I have a change on starting on line 10. It just seemed like that sentence was quite lengthy, so I would propose that it would say, Commissioner Wright asked for clarification on whether a horse putting its head over a fence on a neighbor's property line could technically be considered trespassing, instead of the longer one.
Okay.
And I can send that to you if you need it.
On line 22, Chair Heyman asked if I'd like to insert the following: the character and consistency of before existing neighborhoods could change. So just adding in the character and consistency of between if and existing. And then on line 35, this is the line starting back on the previous line 34. Chair Heyman clarified that if the issue requiring a taller fence is a trespass issue, after the comma, or actually before the comma, insert the following: there are viable alternatives outside of a zoning text amendment, period. For example, comma, and then pick up where the text continues. I think that just better clarifies what I was trying to get at. Any other, did you get that? Do you need me to say it again? You good? Okay. Any other comments on page 2? Page 3?
On line 5, Commissioner Hurst agreed with the other commissioners' comments and expressed that she is, I'd like to change afraid to concerned that the sense of community might be lost.
Okay. Any other revisions on page 3?
I didn't think that I was the one who made a motion to add finding 7. I thought that I was the one who reminded you to add number 8, and Gina was the one who asked to add 7. I can't remember now, but I remember saying, like, didn't you want to do your thing with the legal thing?
I know I added some. Avalon, would you mind just reviewing the?
Maybe. Becky, I didn't catch that. I didn't go back and check it for sure.
Will you just re-review that portion of the recording to make sure that we've attributed the right?
Because I don't think that I mean, the sense of community I thought was important, but I thought that Gina was the one who asked for that to be added, but I might have, I don't know, I could be wrong.
That seems kind of familiar, but.
I thought I remember telling you, don't you want to do your one thing?
Yeah,
and you're
6,
like, yeah.
But that was number 8. I thought I added 6 and 8, but if you'll just double check on that, so we're making sure that we're attributing it to the right person. Any other comments on page 3? I had 2 comments on page 4. So on line 4, where it's talking about a zoning administrator to use there, it should be his/her to be consistent with how we've referred to zoning administrator in line 20. And then I would also change in line 33, where we're also talking about zoning administrator, to use his/her discretion, just to make those consistent. Any other?
Are we talking about Corey there?
Yeah.
So why don't we just say his?
Well, because it could
It's a
later
generic,
be a her.
whoever the
Well, it
zoning
could
administrator is.
change, but right now Corey is the zoning administrator, so why don't we just refer
Because
to?
we're referring to the position, not a specific person.
And by the way, Cassie's looking to get there as soon as she can, so.
Okay, his, her, I like it.
Any other comments on page 4? Page 5, on line 5, I would just defer to staff '(S), staff's judgment. Any other revisions to page 5? The chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and that's it. So I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.